Have any of you ever been on a serious mountain climb? Have you, any mountain climbers in here? I don't mean the kind where you're hanging off, on the side of a long, big cliff, but just kind of hiking and things like that. I've never been on a serious mountain climb, but when I was a boy, I went to a Cub Scout camp out in West Texas, and behind the camp was this very steep sloped mesa or large hill, really, but it was called Forbidden Mountain, and it was named that for the scouts so that they would not climb the mountain. They were forbidden. Well, apparently one of my friends was not used to obeying people like Charlie Miller, scoutmasters, and so he talked me into climbing Forbidden Mountain one night, and we did okay going up, but it was coming down that proved to be a little bit of a problem. We could not see very well, and we were afraid we were just going to slide on down the mountain. So we started yelling for help, and they came and rescued us. And we're lucky we were not bit by a rattlesnake. Well, since then, I have developed a rather healthy fear of heights, which, when you think about it, it's really a fear of falling. To be more precise, it's a fear of landing. That's what it is. So I've never been anybody, someone who's apt to dive off bridges or climb water towers or, be on a serious mountain, climbing a mountain. I do have a favorite mountain climbing joke. Maybe you've heard this, but I'm gonna give it to you in a different version using different names. This will relate to the Southeastern Conference, which is the conference that has the University of Missouri, right? And so here it is. So there were these 4 college alumni that were climbing a mountain one day, and each was from a different Southeastern Conference school. And each one claimed to be the most loyal of all the fans at their alma mater. And as they climbed this mountain together, they argued as to which of them was the most loyal of all. They continued to argue all the way up the mountain, and finally, as they reached the top, the tiger hurled himself off the mountain, shouting as he fell, "This is for Missouri." Well, not wanting to be outdone, the wildcat threw himself off the mountain, proclaiming, "This is for Kentucky." Well, seeing this, the Arkansas Razorback walked over and shouted, "This is for everyone," and pushed the Alabama Crimson Tide off the side of the mountain. Figured that would get here. Maybe this will help you. More applause there. Jesus himself was not a professional mountain climber, and yet he did climb a hill or two in his day. You heard Courtney talk about that. Most famous of all would be Matthew's version of the Sermon on the Mount. It was named that way because Jesus apparently was up on a hillside. And then there is the episode that we just heard today, the story. And you know the story. Jesus climbs a high mountain with his 3 closest friends, Peter, James, and John. And he is, as the text says, he is transfigured before them. Well, what does that mean? Matthew says that his face shone like the sun and his clothes became dazzling white. So even his appearance changed on top of that mountain. And he was also visited by 2 VIPs from Israel's past, Moses and Elijah, the 2 men who represented the 2 great pillars of the Jewish faith, which would be the law and the prophets. And then after that, Jesus and his disciples hear God's voice say, "This is my Son, the beloved, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." And we all remember those are the words that were spoken at his baptism. Now, since this is the second time he hears these sort of baptismal saying, does this mean this is his confirmation, graduation? I don't know. This is a very colorful story, to say the least. And as I mentioned earlier, us preachers, we preach on every year, and sometimes we are at a loss for words. So the question is always, what is it all about? What is it really all about? I realize people might get a little lightheaded climbing up a mountain. And so people might hallucinate on occasion. And yet I don't think that fully accounts for what is happening in this story, which is the changing of someone's countenance, the sudden bleaching of their clothes without benefit of Tide detergent, and the appearance of two men who had been gone for centuries, and the hearing of God's voice. Four very interesting things. And I don't think we're talking hallucination here. We're talking either perhaps mythology or miracle. Maybe we're talking fiction or fantasy. I'll let you decide how you want to read the story. I will say, though, from a scholarly perspective, this story seems to be a little bit out of place in the overall flow of the Jesus narrative. Here's what I mean by that. If you read it literally, it reads like a post-resurrection story. That is, it sounds like something that you would read after he is risen from the dead and all kinds of things are happening, like he's showing up in people's living rooms when the doors are closed and things like that. It sounds more like that than a pre-resurrection story. That is something that happened when he's walking around in the flesh. Now, so how the story may have been inserted into an earlier part of the narrative, nobody really understands that or knows. But so you have to think, okay, why did they do it? Maybe they did it because they needed to put in a teaser. Now, a teaser, that would imply that the gospel writers are really just trying to all of a sudden gain attention for the uniqueness of Jesus by piquing the reader's curiosity with this story. Maybe it's designed to be sort of like a commercial break, something that happens right after a very dramatic moment. Do you remember television commercials, by the way? I know some of you, like myself, I never see them anymore. Commercials, though, are designed to interrupt the narrative flow of a story, of a television program, at kind of interesting moments. You might call them sort of cliffhanging moments, pardon the pun. And so they do that so the viewer doesn't go away, right? So we're going to end right now so that the viewer be going, oh, come on, not now, now I have to endure a commercial. And so you might go to the bathroom, you might go to the kitchen, but you're going to be right back there on the couch watching the show afterward, after the commercial. And so maybe in a similar way, the Transfiguration story is situated immediately after a very dramatic moment. And here's what happened, at least according to Matthew. Jesus tells his disciples something very, very startling. He said, "Truly I tell you." Now, when Jesus says, "Truly I tell you," you better listen. "Truly I tell you, there are some standing here who will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom." Well, the eyebrows would be raised, right? You want to hear more. What's this all about? You want to read more. So if you're reading Matthew's gospel and you're about to fall asleep and you see that, you're going, wait a minute, I can't go to sleep now. I need to read more. So then you have the Transfiguration story just bash right in there. And it's an interesting story, and maybe even more suspenseful than the narrative that just preceded it. To me, it's sort of like a Super Bowl commercial, often better than the game itself, right? Now, this year, of course, that was decidedly not the case. The game was very interesting, and the commercials were, not so much. And yet, although the Transfiguration story seems maybe to be a little out of place, maybe it's exactly where it needs to be. The gospel writers, this is Bible 101. The gospel writers are not historians. They are theologians. Always remember that when you're reading Matthew, Mark, and especially John, Luke, and then especially John. They are theologians. They're not historians. They had their reasons for writing stories and then putting them in a certain place in the overall narrative flow of the Jesus story. And what I have gathered about this story is that the purpose of putting Jesus on this mountaintop is to put him on a metaphorical mountaintop, a symbolic mountaintop, more than an actual mountaintop. And here's what I mean by that. The Transfiguration story is told, was written down in order to elevate Jesus in the pantheon, the gathering of gods in first century Palestine. It was to elevate him above all the other competing divinities and semi-divinities in first century Palestine. And it's even told, really, to one-up his primary competition. Moses, the man who climbed Mount Sinai to retrieve the Ten Commandments and, by the way, acquire a shiny new face in the process, if you remember that. And also Elijah, who is the prophet, the most famous prophet in ancient Israel, and is also the prophet who met God on Mount Horeb. He met God on a mountain. So I think this story is told to sort of say, hey, Jesus can even one-up Moses and Elijah, who, by the way, are there paying him a visit, which is interesting. Now, none of this mountain climbing stuff is coincidence. It's not just background material. It's not just to paint a pretty picture of the story, because mountains were sacred space in the ancient world. This is how people believed they would meet God. You remember, they had a three-storied understanding of the universe. They didn't have the same understanding like we do, but they thought you had three levels. You had heaven above, where God lived, or the gods. You had earth, where we stand, and then underneath, who knows, right? But if you want to see God, you got to get up high. There's no airplanes. You can't do a hang glider. You can't do any of that. You had to climb a mountain. And this is also the best way to validate one's divine status. Really, the point is, Jesus would have been a nobody in the ancient world without a good mountain story. There had to be a mountain story in there somewhere. So here it is. Now, what does it all mean for you and me then? Okay, so great. Jesus elevated. What's that got to do with us? Because few of us believe that we need to literally climb a mountain in order to meet God, even if climbing a mountain is very inspirational, right? But with the lack of oxygen at high levels, we might hallucinate a little bit. But none of us are going to change our countenance, really. Our garments are not going to get brighter if we climb a mountain. And we're not going to, be visited by long gone heroes of the faith. And we're probably not going to hear the voice of God. And we don't need any of that, really. What we do need, however, and I think this is sort of the overall point of the story, we need a better perspective, and we need more vision. And mountains provide that in a literal way, right? Because from a mountaintop, we can see at great distances. So that's a cue to the story. You climb a mountain, you see things that you normally couldn't see. But more importantly, this is the real gist of the story, mountains are ancient symbols of our search for the sacred, our mingling with mystery, our mountaineering for God's majesty. For the ancients, to climb a mountain was to be hot on the trail of the holy. So when you see a mountain, put yourself in the hiking boots of those ancient souls who really just wanted to see God, and those early Christians who really wanted to see Jesus. That's what the story is all about. It's trying to get us to open our eyes to the divine and the holy. I want to conclude by share a brief reflection about sacred mountains. This is by a contemporary theologian from Australia. His name is William Loader, and it's sort of poetic. I'm going to read most of it to you. We are surrounded by mountains, sacred mountains, which watch over us, beckon us, call us to approach and begin the journey. Mountaineering is a risky venture and exhausting, but our mountains are accessible. Every day we meet them, and their magic tells us Just stop. Just turn aside here for a few moments. Let me lift you to the sacred space. There are no gates or barriers. These mountains don't close after sunset. They just lie and wait, offering a quiet space, inviting us to a new view. Even with the greatest disabilities, the frailest limbs, the faintest heart, there is a place for us. No one is too big or small. No one is unworthy. Touch the mountain, and we touch the earth, we touch the universe, and we touch God. Just to say we are coming is more than half the journey. It is to say we belong, to enter the wide embrace of the mountainside, and to say yes to love. There is a mountain stream for the thirsty, and its waters are there for cleansing. There is peace and forgiveness and renewal. The wind of the Spirit sometimes blows strongly, challenging us to stand firm, or gently touches us with memories of God's goodness. Climb the mountain, and you see a long way. People you have not noticed. Distant needs which want to say also, I am here. And in the silence of the sacred space are voices of hope, of joy, of pain, of possibility. Climb the mountain, and you will see Jesus. Amen.